Hey, Comp I hope you guys are all well and healthy and safe. We are going to just recap Iran's first frame, the government, and then move on to Iran's second frame, elections. So, just as a recap, the big thing I want you to take away from government is that there are theocratic and democratic elements to Iran's governmental structure. So, that's kind of what I'm going to break down here. So at the executive branch, there's a dual executive, the supreme leader and the president. So the supreme leader is ultimate interpreter of Sharia law. He is the imam and appointed for life, and his word is essentially divine law. So that's the theocratic part. The democratic part is the president. This is a separate institution. It is definitely subservient to the supreme leader, and the president is elected by the people. All right, then let's move to the legislature. Primarily, it's a parliamentary system and it's a unicameral body known as the Majlis, and there are theocratic and democratic components of the Majlis. The democratic component is that it is a parliamentary system, and the members of the Majlis are directly elected by the Iranian people, and they pass legislation. Um, the theocratic component is that any legislation that the Majlis pass cannot contradict Sharia law. Okay, now we're going to go to these three odd addendum or lanyap bodies that are part of the legislature. Again, it is these there is a unicameral body called the Majlis. Then you have these kind of addendum bodies. The Guardian Council is made up of 12 members. Six are religious clerics that are appointed by the Supreme Leader. The other six are lay leaders, meaning non clerical or secular leaders, that are selected by the Majlis. All right, and that gives them their theocratic and democratic component. Then we have the Assembly of Religious Experts. And so this is elected by the citizens as opposed to the Guardian Council, which is all appointed. Right? The Assembly of Religious Experts does have a democratic component in the fact that it is elected by the Iranian citizens. However, it is the main interpreter of Sharia law. That's its function. Sometimes the Assembly of Religious Experts and the Guardian Council may have some disagreements, and that's where the Expediency Council comes in. So the Expediency Council is appointed by the Supreme Leader. They're mostly clerics, however, and I guess this is the least democratic body because not all members rather, are clerics being religious leaders. All right, then we have the judiciary branch. And they do embrace the Sharia law, like we saw in Nigeria. Only the northern provinces embrace Sharia law, but in Iran, it is all Sharia law, subject to the judgment of the Supreme Leader and the Guardian Council. And democratic components, there are criminal and civil courts, so they do have that type of structure, but they are largely not independent. Okay, so today we're going into elections, and I know elections technically are not in the AP exam allegedly, but there's so many things that overlap that I kind of get worried about that. So I'm going to go through this frame actually kind of quickly. So this should be a relatively short video. All right, so the electoral process is considered to be open and competitive. The one exception was in 2009, and we'll talk about that 2009 election, but largely they are considered to be open, free elections, and competitive. So who is directly elected in the Iranian structure? The president, the Majlis, and the Assembly of Religious Experts. Iranians really have no direct say for the Supreme Leader, the Guardian Council, and the Expediency Council. So there is a higher voter turnout. It is competitive, but let's qualify that by saying that all candidates do have to get looked at by the Supreme Leader and the Guardian Council. So in a sense, they're not particularly competitive, but those that are in candidates that are in. There are multiple candidates. There's not just one guy. There's multiple candidates, and there is higher voter turnout. So the president is elected through a two-ballot majority, and if they don't get 50% plus one in the first ballot, then it goes to a second ballot. The president is elected to 4-year terms, two-term limit, the majorlies. So they're elected every 4 years, similar as the president, the year before the presidential election. So you don't have them concurrently being changed. There are around 290 single-member districts. Each elects a member in a first-past-the-post system, as long as the candidate gets 25% of the so you can't win with 15%. You have to get at least 25% in order to get first past the post. All right, the Assembly of Religious Experts is elected every 8 years and must pass the candidacy test to qualify to demonstrate their expertise in religious scholarship. Political parties, there are none. There are factions, though, the conservative faction and then the reformist faction. So, conservatives tend to be more traditional. They tend to be more religious. They tend to be kind of old school, whereas the reformists embrace a more secular, embrace a more modern society. The Constitution does allow for political parties, but none really exist. Really, when we started to see these two factions, the conservatives and the reformists, emerge, it was right around President Khatami's election. So this was a president. This is not the supreme leader. Just to complicate things even further, there's Ayatollah Khomeini and Ayatollah Khomeini, and then we have President Khatami. So he was considered to be and one of the few reformist presidents that Iran has had since 1979. And his presidency was controversial. And since then, multiple parties have formed around personalities and not issues. And I'm going to give you that list. You can see it here. But at the end of the day, there's no stable political party system. They come and go routinely, and they have no sustainability. So really, what do we see in terms of political factions are the conservatives and the reformists. All right. So many of these political parties that you see listed here formed originally by civil society organizations, and they basically just championed a particular candidate, right? And that's why they championed around personalities and not necessarily issues. All right, so regardless of that, our real political party system is the reformists and the conservatives, also known as the hardliners. The system does represent this factionalism, splintering of political elites based on these personalities. So sometimes you're going to have Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who is considered to be a more of a conservative hardliner, although more modern. It's so weird, you'll see. And then, the current president, Rouhani, despite being a cleric, is considered to be more moderate, more reformist, so weird stuff happening in Iran. Civil society is weak. The government does allow for supervision of NGOs. So NGOs and civil society is considered to be weak. Now, you may have heard of the Arab Spring or the Tehran Spring. This happened around 2010, and there was a movement starting in North Africa, moving into the Middle East, and to bring about democratic reforms that largely failed, right? So that was in 2010. So despite this desire for more democracy, it really just doesn't exist in much of the Arab and Persian world. All right, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was a two-term president, and he was elected in 2005 and then again in 2009. And he was considered to be more of a conservative. He tended to close down newspapers, ban and censor books, put up firewalls on websites, and all this kind of suppression of individual freedom and individual rights. He was not a religious leader, though. He was one of the few secular presidents in Iran's history, but very much a hardliner. I think it was in order to get in good with the Ayatollah, because he was not a religious leader. He tended to be more conservative, cracking down on individual liberty. Civil society has really not been restored under the current regime under Rouhani, um, despite the fact that Rouhani is considered more of a moderate or a reformist. And the result of a lack of civil society has created a lot of discontent among the Iranian people, particularly among the middle class people who are well educated. They tend to be, interestingly, reformists. These middle class, more elite, more wealthy Iranians tend to be more modern, tend to be more secular, tend to embrace more Western ideas. And as a result of the suppression of civil society, many of the middle class, educated, have left Iran, creating what's known as a brain drain. All right, the Constitution does guarantee freedom of assembly as long as it doesn't violate Islam or the Islam Republic. Interest groups. So, interest groups, there are very few of them. So, it's not a corporatist system or a pluralist system due to the lack of number of organized groups. So the line between interest groups, political parties, and other civil society is hard to differentiate. The only one that may have some degree of sustainability are the bazaris. This is the name given to a group, a merchant class of workers in Iranian bazaars. These are like open markets, and they sell things. They're retailers to a large extent. And so in Iran, they have traditional marketplaces, and these are called bazaars. And they're small business owners, essentially what this merchant class is. And they have largely been independent and kind of fought back against the suppression and the overtness of the Iranian government. So the bazaars have proven to be among the most reliable catalysts of political upheaval in the country's long history. Bazari's dissent was instrumental in the success of Iran's constitutional movement in 1905, um, and then the trying to uh, get rid of the oil industry in the 1950s, and then the overthrow of the monarchy, that's the Shah, in 1979. So they have been a catalyst for political change. And they have come in conflict with Iran and Iran's government over many issues, including taxes. So, if there is an independent interest group, it would be the Bazaris. One indication that that civil society may be returning to Iran is the fact that Iran has a growing number of young people, disproportionate to their older people. So the young have grown in proportion to the old, meaning dramatic increase, right, in proportion to the old, if that makes sense. 50% of the population is under 35 and are politically active. So it's this young group that has more invested in the future of Iran, so they demand more political change. So this could lead to some upheaval into the future. Uh, Many are also this young population is concerned about a lack of jobs. 70% of those unemployed are young. They don't like the religious restrictions. They don't like the traditional way of life. They've actually, this young group, many of them who are sons and daughters of disillusioned middle class professionals, the brain drain group, um, these young people are attracted to Western pop culture, music, dress cars, computers, and if you saw that in the Fareed Zakaria video, a lot of the women, yes, wear the headdress, but makeup and the exposure of hair under all that kind of stuff. All right, that's it. That ends this frame. I hope you guys stay safe. Make sure you watch the Fareed video if you haven't done it.